Hello and welcome. Today we will be discussing motivation and engagement when it comes to digital game-based learning. Today, I'll also be providing you with a real-world example of how flow sounds in my background during this IDT presentation brought to you by my husband playing Xbox. Let's get started. Today we're going to review 3 motivation frameworks: flow theory, ARC's model of motivation, and self-determination theory. We will then review a few similarities and differences between these frameworks, and then finally we're going to touch on how the motivational frameworks connect to the bigger picture, which is game-based learning. When it comes to flow theory, the understanding is that this theory is based on the individual and their consciousness. A person can make themselves happy or miserable, regardless of what's actually happening in the outside world, just by changing the contents of their consciousness. So regardless of the size of your house, the amount of money you make, how long your commute is, you have the power over how you think and you can train yourself, much like the law of attraction. Happiness, in fact, is a condition that must be prepared for, cultivated, and defended privately by each person. People who learn to control their inner experience will be able to determine the quality of their lives, which is as close as any of us can come to being happy. The flow state was introduced and is defined as when someone is so involved in a goal-driven activity that nothing else matters. This is also leading to a positive psychological state. The common characteristics of this optimal experience have been defined as a sense that one's skills are adequate to cope with the challenges at hand in a goal-directed, rule-bound action system that provides clear clues as to how well one is performing. This is when the concentration is so fierce that everything else melts away. It's when people are willing to do something just for the sake of doing it versus thinking about what they can get out of it. Flow sometimes occurs at random, but occurs much more often through a structured activity or through an individual's ability to make flow occur. Flow state is also when you balance, again, skill and challenge. So as you can see here, the optimal flow challenge is when that flow is balanced between the skill and challenge. When you have too much challenge and not enough skill, you're going to reach anxiety. When you have the opposite, you're going to get bored. So, flow is a course of long-time attractiveness for players playing serious games. Excuse his language. Okay, so moving on to ARC's model of motivation. What is it? A model created by John Keller to be used as a method to improve the motivational appeal of instructional materials. This model also contains strategies to reach each of these 4 distinct categories that I'm going to touch on. But before that, first, this model contains the 4 conceptual categories that consume many of the specific subsections that you can see here. Secondly, it includes a set of strategies to use to enhance the motivational appeal of instruction. And third, it incorporates a systematic design process called motivational design that can be used effectively with traditional instructional design models. All 4 of the categories are attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. All of these 4 conditions must be met to become and remain motivated. Attention, the first condition, is an element of motivation and is also a prerequisite for learning. The motivational concern is for getting and sustaining attention. As we all know, getting or gaining attention is easy, but sustaining it is harder for those of us who have pets or nieces and nephews or brothers and sisters or kids, husbands and wives. We're all well too aware. Relevance can come from making the instruction seem relevant to the present and or future opportunities for the students, or by showing that learning is an end to in itself, and also is by the way you teach versus just the content of what you're teaching. Confidence can influence a student's persistence and accomplishment. According to Keller, confident people tend to attribute the causes of success to things such as ability and effort instead of luck or the difficulty of the task. They also tend to be oriented towards involvement in the task activity and enjoy learning even if it means making mistakes. Also, confident people tend to believe that they can effectively accomplish their goals by means of their actions. And then finally, satisfaction involves research and practices that helps individuals feel good about their accomplishments. Reinforcement theory tells us that people should be more motivated if the task and the reward are defined and an appropriate reinforcement schedule is used. So, lastly, self-determination theory is another theory of motivation. This is geared toward developing courses, workplaces, etc., that harness the right kind of motivation in your learners. You have to understand the different types of motivation and how they lead to specific learning behaviors. That information can be harnessed to create more successful learning outcomes. According to this theory, it's not just the quantity of motivation that matters. The quality or type of motivation can influence our persistence in a behavior and even our general well-being. The theory maps out 7 types of motivation on a continuum, with intrinsic motivation being the most desirable type. Intrinsic motivation is the name for the type of motivation people get when they enjoy carrying out a behavior and do so willingly. At the opposite end of the continuum is amotivation, which is a complete lack of desire to engage in a behavior. In the middle of these 2 types, we have intrinsic motivation. It's divided into 4 different types. The key with intrinsic motivation is to identify which of these 4 types someone's motivation fits into, and then use that information to move them towards the intrinsic motivation at the end as much as possible. The way that you're able to move someone's motivation to become more intrinsic is by first understanding and identifying which of the 4 types someone belongs to, then using competence, relatedness, and autonomy to fill their basic psychological needs, which helps shift them to a more positive and self-determined type of motivation. All right, so some of the similarities. Kowal and Fortier in 1999 found that participants who had self-determined motivation reached the highest states of flow experience. In Lee, 2005, students also with higher self-determined motivation were more likely to reach the flow experience and to be deeply engaged in their task. Both Deci and Ryan and ARCS have conditions that must be met to achieve and keep motivation. So with ARCS, there's attention, relevance, confidence, and satisfaction. And then with Deci and Ryan, need for competence, to feel relatedness and autonomy are of utmost importance for motivation in the self-determination theory. All 3 also need an optimal level of challenge. Some of the differences is with the ARCS model and then versus the self-determination theory and flow theory. So one is a model and the other 2 are theories. Also, with flow, you don't care about the outcome versus the other 2. You're so engrossed in the process that the rest of the world is forgotten. And then lastly, flow is geared to the individual and their consciousness versus the others are based on how to cultivate and create learning environments. That's not to say that with flow you can't cultivate it and train students, but it's really, flow is more geared towards the individual and what they can do in their state. So finally, how do all of these frameworks relate to game-based learning? Well, with flow, what makes these activities conducive to flow, when you're creating them, is that they have rules, which is part of all games that require learning of skills, such as, each level. They set up goals that you have to achieve, they provide feedback, and they make control possible. So again, flow state is balancing that skill and challenge. And then flow state, of course, is a long-time attractiveness for players playing serious games. ARCS is also important to e-learning. The model is particularly important to e-learning since motivating learners in an online course is more difficult than face-to-face. Also, game-based learning fits within the ARCS model when it comes to confidence and satisfaction. With self-determination theory, intrinsic motivation is the goal. You're able to go through levels and change the motivation. This is important when it comes to designing games. That's all I have for you today, and I hope you enjoyed.